order to stay in a relationship with any narcissist, parent, partner, friend, you may find yourself pawning off pieces of your authentic self. And you need to do that in order to survive, because they will berate and devalue your true self, or they're gaslighted. It's not good for you. Of course you hide your true self from them. You're being self-protective.
Do you think narcissistic abuse can turn you or me or anyone narcissistic? So that's a question. Can narcissistic abuse turn me narcissistic? Take a minute, drop it in the comment section, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. And before I get to that, as we think about what can narcissistic abuse do to us, let's talk about healing. Again, we have that healing program coming up. That link is in the video description. Hit that, get more information. And welcome to this channel. If you're new, please subscribe. Like you said, you're going to learn, get questions asked. I'm going to ask you to answer them, and then I'm going to try to answer them. So let's take this one on. Can narcissistic abuse turn me narcissistic? And I look forward to reading what kinds of answers you gave, because I'm going to give my answer. So this is a question for the ages, one that has been coming up over and over again. It's like this fear people who are going through narcissistic abuse have. It's like, is this going to happen to me? It has come up in every seminar we've done. It's come up in dozens of emails, comments on videos. So let's take this question on. It's so painful to hear, because it's so much a part of sort of the mental number people do on themselves when they go through narcissistic abuse. Now, remember that when we talk about narcissistic abuse, self-blame is one of the hallmark characteristics. Most survivors spend their time wondering, how am I responsible for all of this? And this is made worse by the gaslighting and manipulation. In essence, another person telling you that you are to blame for the mess of this relationship. So it does not surprise me that so many people are asking this question. One response that, like, for example, you're in a narcissistic relationship. One thing that narcissistic people will often say, especially if you make the mistake of calling them out as narcissistic, is to quickly for them to flip and pivot and call you narcissistic. And if that happens enough to you, you may once again start to doubt yourself and say, they keep saying it, maybe it's true. When you are going through narcissistic abuse, it's easy to become preoccupied and ruminate. You can't get the confusion out of your mind. That makes sense. But some people misinterpret that constant being in your own head as being selfish and self-focused. Not really. When every day of your life feels like a mind F word, it is easy to remain in your head. The quick answer to that question, can it turn you narcissistic? No. Experiencing narcissistic abuse as an adult is not going to turn you into a narcissist, but let's break that down. First, we need to understand how to make a narcissist, which is another series on this channel. Remember, you want to make a narcissist, it's a developmental process. People are not, as adults, empathic sweethearts who one day wake up and are narcissistic as adults. The tracks for narcissism are laid early in life. Again, talked about that extensively on this channel. Things like inborn temperament, attachment issues, trauma and abuse and neglect, overindulgence, underindulgence, emotional absence of caregivers, a child being told over and over again that they are more special than other children, being overindulged for accomplishments and skills. This stuff, variously, lays out the underlying foundational architecture of narcissism. And that just won't switch on in an adult. And I'm aware that people watching this channel are very smart. You really are knowing your narcissism. And you're thinking, hey, Dr. Ramani, that list you just gave, those things happened to me as a child. I experienced trauma and neglect, or emotionally neglectful and abusive caregivers. So does that mean now, as an adult, after exposure to narcissistic abuse, that's going to turn on this sort of narcissism thing inside of me? Good question. And still, no. If you have empathy, good empathy, real emotional empathy that is consistent, and you are self-reflective and self-aware, going through narcissistic abuse isn't going to turn that off. In fact, it is your empathy that often leaves you blaming yourself and not clearly seeing the harm that the toxic people in your life are doing. Short of a traumatic brain injury or some other toxic organic process like a stroke or a tumor or acute exposure to certain substances, those are really the only ways someone's personality would suddenly shift in adulthood. In fact, it's sort of one of those clinical training 101 things we learned probably in the first year of graduate school. If someone's personality changes quickly, you've got to get them medically worked up immediately, because personalities just don't change for other reasons. There's usually something medically responsible. Nice people tend to stay nice over time, but after narcissistic abuse, nice people might often be preoccupied, and mean and egocentric people, needless to stay mean and egocentric. But after narcissistic abuse, you do feel different. Most pointedly, people will report confusion, self-doubt, anger, sadness, helplessness, powerlessness, rumination, regret, self-blame. All of those things can make a dent in your empathy and your ability to be present with others, because the fact is you are more sort of stuck in your head. The anger part is tough for people who will often say, I wasn't an angry person. I don't think of myself as an angry person, but I'm angry all the time now. People might find themselves more agitated and angry as they go through narcissistic abuse, and even at times rageful, which really is unlike them, and will feel, oh no, now I'm the one who's rageful. Now I'm as rageful as the narcissist. Am I becoming like them? Okay, so let me give you a reality check. Someone's doubting your reality. They're gaslighting you, manipulating, invalidating you. As from my seat, anger seems like a really normal response. But if it is not how you want to go through the world as an angry person, and most healthy people don't, it feels like a shift inside of you, like you're changing. But the fact is, that's what narcissistic abuse does. It does create shifts in you until you understand it. I have worked with survivors of narcissistic abuse for decades. They will say, I don't feel like the same person anymore. I used to be lighthearted, sociable, and confident, and believe in myself and in this relationship, or after this relationship, I feel like my self-esteem has tanked. I no longer trust my instincts. I am more isolated. So yeah, of course it feels like a change, but I am willing to bet that you still feel empathy. You do care about others or feel sad or happy when you're hearing about someone else's difficult time or their happiness. You still care about how your behavior affects other people. So the short answer is no. Narcissistic abuse isn't going to turn you narcissistic, and no, you are not becoming narcissistic as a result of being exposed to this. The narcissistic person telling you that you are the narcissist doesn't make it true. You being stuck in your head and maybe not as plugged in to the world around you doesn't make you narcissistic. In fact, feeling disconnected and not present is a pattern we also observe in people, for example, living with depression and anxiety. I certainly don't think they're narcissistic if a person's depressed. So that not being present doesn't just mean you're narcissistic. Nietzsche wrote, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. I agree and disagree with this line by Nietzsche. I do believe that narcissistically abusive relationships are an abyss, but I don't think people fighting the monsters that are inside of them and outside of them become monsters per se. I actually think the most monstrous part is how cruel survivors are to themselves and how they talk to themselves. That's the monster. This is why, as we spend more and more time with narcissists in our lives, we get sick. Our physical health, our mental health, they both deteriorate. I have worked in this narcissistic abuse space for a long time and have experienced a fair share of it in my own life. And I know it has taken years off of my life and a toll on my mental health. It's the truth. The monstrous stuff that comes out of narcissistic abuse is what happens to us. We aren't becoming narcissistic, but we are not our best selves because of these relationships. When we're in them, we do become less present. We censor ourselves more. We live in fear. None of that is us at our best. The most painful part of narcissistic abuse to me is the self-blame I witness in survivors. I know part of it is that if we believe we're responsible, maybe we can shift something. Maybe we feel a little bit more in control. You can spend a lifetime in that self-blaming cycle if you don't learn more about it. My life's work is to help people pop out of those cycles, to stop using the damn narcissists out there as the thing we navigate by, but to turn them into white noise in our heads. None of this is easy. But I can promise you this, the narcissistic abuse won't turn you narcissistic. You are still empathic and compassionate, but you are also in pain. And when we are in pain, none of us are ever at our very best. So short answer, and I better see a lot of no's in that comment section. Can narcissistic abuse turn us narcissistic? No. Can it pull us off our A game? Absolutely. But it ain't going to turn us narcissistic. That is something that gets set a long time ago.
Is narcissism infectious? Can you actually catch it? Because if you can, you might be thinking, whoa, we're in trouble, because this seems to be getting more common all the time. Okay, so let's start with a sort of philosophical comment. The philosopher Nietzsche wrote, this is a great quote too, he wrote, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you." So, spend enough time with a narcissist, you are gazing into an abyss. So this leads into a question I get very often. Basically, just as Nietzsche just suggested, the question becomes, will I become toxic if I spend enough time with a toxic person? This is a complicated issue. So let me break it down. Let's start simple. First of all, narcissism is not an infectious disease per se. It's a personality pattern, and it's a personality pattern that unfolds as part of one's social development, early life history, and their own personal temperament. So no, you can't catch it. You develop it. But here's the tricky bit, the real challenge. If you spend enough time with a narcissist, yeah, it does change you. And some of these changes may end up being things you don't like about yourself. So let's start easy. Let's start in adult life, okay? Let's say your partner or your spouse is a narcissist, because by the time you enter into an adult relationship, you are an adult and your personality is fully grown by then, okay? So it's not going to change that much. Now, let's revisit what happens to you when you're in a narcissistic relationship. In that relationship, you're subjected to all kinds of awful things: lack of empathy, entitlement, arrogance, their chronic sense of being a victim, their hypersensitivity, their chronic need for validation, for admiration. And what does that mean for you? That means years of invalidation, dismissiveness, gaslighting, minimization, walking on eggshells, confusion, and self-doubt. Now, enduring a narcissistic relationship really becomes about survival. Over time, these relationships leave you feeling helpless, hopeless, and powerless, on top of all that other stuff, like the invalidation and all that other stuff I listed. So, to stay in this relationship, a lot of people learn to start clipping their own wings. In essence, you sort of start giving up on yourself, on life, on the relationship. Now, I want you to think for a minute about what survival looks like. Survival is life stripped to the bare minimum. If I were trying to survive on a desert island, I would not be concerned with good manners or being a good empathic listener. I got to be honest with you, I'd be focused on getting my next meal, on finding shelter, on getting water, on staying alive. In a narcissistic relationship, survivalism means that you may find that you stop getting the chance or even care to practice your basic skills like empathy, compassion, kindness, reciprocity, and mutuality. You become so used to getting interrupted, to being ignored, so you may speak very abruptly to make your point, or you might give very short, clipped answers. You may no longer show your feelings as much because why would you? They were constantly not noticed, your feelings were mocked, your feelings were minimized. Why would you put yourself in that vulnerability? You stop doing the stuff of being a kind, compassionate person because sadly, it doesn't serve a function in what is often this primary relationship. These things, empathy, compassion, sharing, these things are devalued, they're not rewarded, they're not received or well received, and they're not seen. There's also a darker side to this, and it is something I have observed in people who have stayed in narcissistic relationships for 10 years or longer. These are what I term the long-term survivors of narcissistic relationships. People in these long-term relationships, when we'd expect this in any relationship, you start to mirror your partner, especially if the relationship becomes quite isolated, as narcissistic relationships often do. You, as a once healthy person in this relationship, may slowly find yourself lacking empathy at the level you once did, but you also may find yourself seeking out validation. It makes sense why somebody would do this. You aren't getting any at home with the narcissist. You may even find yourself behaving in an entitled manner, maybe even talking over other people. It's as though your healthy interpersonal muscles start to atrophy as you spend more and more time in a narcissistic relationship. You know, it's interesting. I remember one case in particular. It was years ago. It was a personal acquaintance I had known through other people. And this person was very clearly married to a horrific, malignant narcissist. I think of marriage was like 15 years. In the years I knew her through these other people, I watched this woman morph from a relatively mindful, kind, aware, compassionate person who became increasingly abrupt, clipped, self-referential. She talked about herself a lot, was very entitled. It was a really fascinating but really quite sad evolution to watch. But it actually made sense to me, given what horrible treatment she was living through on a daily basis. Interestingly, she did end up getting divorced, and the divorce was messy and expensive and painful. And as she no longer lived with this man, the more time she spent away from him, she slowly began to pop back to becoming a little bit more self-aware, a little more aware of other people, less entitled. It was as though those interpersonal skills she once had no more function in that relationship. So she kind of lost them. The only example I could think of here is if you move to another country and you stop speaking your usual language in favor of the new language, you may start losing a little bit of your other language if you don't practice it. We lose things like language and other skills. The same thing happens with some of these interpersonal skills as well. There's also another element to narcissistic relationships, of course, and that's the fallout of narcissistic abuse. Now, one pattern that can be observed in survivors of narcissistic abuse is that they can become socially withdrawn, emotionally distracted, isolated, and their emotions may become more constricted, secondary to the confusion and anxiety generated by being in a toxic relationship. They may then look like they have less empathy to other people. But this idea of catching narcissism really comes down to how you still feel. If you really, let's just play this out, if you really did catch narcissism, then let's face it, You would lack empathy. You would truly be entitled. You'd be arrogant. You'd be superficial. You'd be that person always looking for validation. And you'd fall apart and crumble whenever you were stressed, particularly if you were disappointed, and you'd lash out with rage. That's not likely to happen. You may not manifest compassion in the same way, but you still got it. So let's go back to that idea of survival. What we see, what does happen, is that in being in a relationship with or working for narcissistic people, nobody has your back. In fact, they may not just be neglecting you. They may be actively harming and manipulating you. So in a way, a sort of selfishness, a survival selfishness may engulf you. You need to do you, or nothing's going to happen in your life. You'll get stuck or worse. You may find that you are having to put your needs first at times, and perhaps you actually are putting your needs first in a very appropriate manner. But you're so unaccustomed to putting your needs first, you label them as selfish. But this act of having to sometimes grab those little scraps of what you need to take care of you, and then also feeling like you don't have the bandwidth to listen to other people's problems, can really factor into that fear that people have. Like, am I becoming narcissistic too? Nah, I don't think you are. You're probably just getting burned out from never getting repleted, from never getting filled up again in your primary relationships. But I'm going to go back to this bigger question. Can I catch narcissism? Because I came from a narcissistic family. Many of the things I just said about survivalism, the things I said, like, for example, believing that doing what you need for yourself is selfish rather than being human to take care of yourself, and that idea of diminished bandwidth, these are all factors that come to play if you originate from a narcissistic family system. Since narcissistic family systems mean that the family narcissists, the parents, maybe the sibling, get everything, they get all the resources, while everyone else is basically starving to death, you can see how this survivalism could have kicked in as a child and could carry in maybe into a selfishness you sometimes feel as an adult. But there are bigger issues with families. Yes, absolutely. People who come from narcissistic family systems are at risk of developing narcissistic patterns in adulthood. Now, given that narcissism is very much an attachment issue, narcissistic parents aren't very strong in the attachment department. The lack of mirroring you get from a narcissistic parent, the fact that no one taught you to regulate your emotions, and just simply mirroring entitled parents, all of that is going to put a person at risk for narcissism. But here's the rub. If you're an adult, you survived your narcissistic family system, if you got through that and you still have intact empathy, you're not entitled, you don't believe you deserve special treatment, you can be self-reflective regarding your impact on others, you can regulate your emotions, you don't require validation to get through the day, every single day, you can manage disappointment, then you're good. Then you're good. You aren't going to become that monster that Nietzsche was talking about just because you're spending time with narcissists. But again, all of that said, spending time with narcissists is in fact taking a tremendous toll on you. It's toxic. And it makes it much more difficult if you spend time with these kinds of people to be your best self. Being with a narcissist, having to go gray rock, having to fluff them to just keep your life and running on time, all of that means that in order to stay in a relationship with any narcissist, parent, partner, friend, you may find yourself pawning off pieces of your authentic self. And you need to do that in order to survive, because they will berate and devalue your true self, or they'll gaslight it. It's not good for you. Of course you hide your true self from them. You're being self-protective. The transformations that happen to a person experiencing narcissistic abuse can be scary. And you may wonder if you are actually turning narcissistic. And because the narcissist in your life may actually accuse you of being a narcissist, and that's back to their standby tricks, their projection, their gaslighting, you run the risk of beginning to believe them. Narcissistic abuse pulls us away from our true selves. I want you to take the time to become acquainted and reacquainted with yourself. Only you know if you're empathic, self-aware, kind, compassionate, and well-regulated. No, you don't become narcissistic by dint of spending time with a narcissist. However, you are also not going to be your best self. You're not going to be your authentic self. And losing those parts of yourself is never good. And on top of that, in your narcissistic relationship, you may sadly have learned to be a gaslighter. Here's the issue. The problem is the person you're gaslighting is yourself. Please stop doing that. We've got enough problems in our world these days with infectious diseases. I think we're all clear on that. Narcissism may be harming your mental health, but thank goodness it's not infectious. What it does to us is it hijacks us when we're in the presence of it. And that sort of hollow, almost post-traumatic, empty sense you feel from being with a narcissist, not feeling in touch with your feelings, isolating, almost not caring as much about other people, that can leave some people to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm becoming this person. You're not. Here's the experiment, and this is the challenge I'm going to issue to all of you, okay? Here's what I want you to do. I want you, if you're able to find a 1, 2, 3, even 4-day period away from your narcissist, okay? I want you to do that. And I want you to almost keep a journal and track yourself and see how much you start popping back to your usual stuff. You laugh louder, you feel more comfortable in your skin, you just feel warmer, kinder, more compassionate. If that happens over time, you're not a narcissist. That's all inside of you. You've learned to lock it up, lock it away from the narcissist, who ends up often harming and criticizing those best parts of yourself. So give yourself a narcissism diet from time to time. Try and get those breaks, because when you do, you're going to start seeing that beautiful, authentic part of yourself. And good golly, I'd love to see that that's the part of you that gets to shine on a daily basis. So remember, you can't catch narcissism, but it ain't good for you if you're spending time with it. One thing that often comes in that people are asking us about is a lot of worry after watching the channel. Maybe I'm the narcissist. Maybe I'm the one who's behaving badly. Some people watching this channel, in fact, I think it's wonderful if you actually are questioning that in yourself. But don't question it for the wrong reasons. For folks who are saying taking accountability, it's a courageous step. But for some people are using this label against themselves for things that might be stretching the pieces, or are being told by the narcissist that they're narcissistic. So here's the question that came up, is that people are saying, hey, I sometimes treat people badly. I actually hate this about myself. I'm aware I'm doing it. But oh my God, does this make me narcissistic? Let's take this one apart. Like I said, more than a few people sent in this question, and I've seen this pop up in different places. So maybe the question here is everyone who treats other people rudely or badly narcissistic? And the answer to that is no. So let's break this down. Narcissism is a personality style. A gentle reminder, and I will say this again and again, narcissism is not a diagnosis. It's a personality style. Other personality styles are things like agreeableness, antagonistic, openness, neurotic, introverted. All of these are styles. Narcissism is just one thing on that list. Some of these styles make for healthier relationships, for example, agreeableness, but they are just styles. The more flexible a person is, the healthier they are. So you can have flexible introverts, people who might prefer the time alone or solitude or avoiding the crowds, but can rally when it is important to others or to themselves. Personality styles are consistent, meaning that this is largely who we are. Agreeable people are agreeable. Do they sometimes have a snippy day? Absolutely yes. Neurotic people are neurotic. Do they sometimes do things that feel fearless and bold and courageous? Yes. But more days than not, our personalities dictate how we are going to be, and they make us a little bit predictable, which is not a bad thing. Introverted people are not likely to be standing in line to be the first one at the new hotspot. Agreeable people are likely to step in and help you out. Your stubborn friend is likely to grind in their heels, and you know that going in. The same is true of narcissism, but it's trickier because more days than not, they're going to do something mean, manipulative, invalidating, or gaslighty. Narcissistic people do have a lot of good days and moments. That is what's driving everyone's confusion. But when the rubber meets the road, and for some reason they feel unsafe, or angry, or disappointed, or frustrated, or stressed, or like they're not getting enough attention, they will strike. A cobra is never going to coil up in your lap and take a nap. It's just not how it works. So back to the question. I hear from folks who say, listen, sometimes I'm not a nice person. I do get snippy and nasty and ick, and I feel awful right away. They'll say that they apologize right away. They feel bad. They'll want to make it right. They try to do right away. People who feel this way, they'll wish that they didn't do it, that they didn't say it. They're angry at themselves. They feel bad that they did it. They feel bad for the other person that they did it. And they hope that the other person isn't too hurt by their sort of mean behavior. And listen, folks who do this may do it again. But at the moment they do it, the moment they feel bad and they recognize it's not okay. Here is the key. If you are a person who is sometimes, more often than you would like, not nice, you can be reactive and strike when someone says something to you. You can sometimes say things that are not nice. But you recognize almost right away that it's not nice, and you attempt to apologize, take ownership non-defensively, and are able to be accountable. That doesn't sound like narcissism. For some folks, a history of trauma can sometimes result in that kind of reactivity, a sort of quick response at times of perceived threat. Now, let's face it, that behavior in the long term is not sustainable because it does take a toll on others. After a while, the apologies are simply not enough. But that awareness of the behavior, the accountability, the attempt to address it, again, non-defensively, that doesn't track with narcissism. In general, narcissistic people do not see their behavior as a problem. They are so firmly entrenched in their rightness and may even believe that they are great people who have tons of empathy that it feels almost delusional. If they are snappy and reactive, the narcissistic person will be more likely to blame the other person. Apologies will be hollow, things like, I'm sorry you feel that way. They will never take ownership. And if you do attempt if you do attempt to get them to apologize, they will rage at you and gaslight you. So for those of you who say, I sometimes don't like how I am. In fact, I am not always nice, and I say these not nice things, and in fact, I feel like my behavior looks like the behavior of the narcissistic person in my life sometimes. Take a step back and ask yourself about self-awareness, accountability, empathic awareness, and the willingness to take responsibility. If you see it, that's a good sign that you are not narcissistic per se. It is a wake-up call, though, to work on mindfulness, on behavioral regulation, considering therapy, especially trauma-informed therapy. All of these are useful tools. Listen, if a person's not narcissistic, these tools are not likely to work, or any change is not likely to be sustainable. When we perceive any of our patterns to be similar or analogous to those of the narcissistic people around us, it can actually be quite devastating because it's the last thing we want to be to someone else. However, if you are catching yourself in it, you genuinely feel uncomfortable or bad about your behavior and want to take ownership, don't sweat the idea that you are narcissistic. Instead, think about addressing your behavior and your mindfulness. Don't get so caught in like, oh my gosh, this is what I am, because when we think we might actually be fully narcissistic, We may even be discouraged from making a change. Really be self-reflective on your behavior. And frankly, if you are narcissistic and hearing this, listen, it's just about doing the work, about putting your head down, being mindful and aware, and not feeling contempt for the very real emotional experiences that other people are having.
So I'm going to put again, I know I love asking y'all questions up front, up top, but ask yourself this question. Have you ever felt like, I don't like who I am when I'm with the narcissist? Like, I like the person I am with them, but not them. Ever had that feeling? Drop it in the comments. As you can imagine, it's a pretty common experience, but I want to break it down because this sense of not liking who you are when you are with the narcissist is actually something that really can take a toll above and beyond the narcissistic relationship on a person. Narcissistic abuse has a cascade of patterns associated with it. Anxiety, self-blame, confusion, self-doubt, you already know the list. But for many people, they also have another issue within these relationships. They don't like who they are when they are with the narcissist. Lots, not all, but lots of people who find themselves stuck in long-term narcissistic relationships are often very empathic, right? It's why they didn't kick the narcissist to the curb a long time ago. They try to see both sides. They give the narcissistic person too many second chances, too much benefit of the doubt, too much justification. Many people in narcissistically abusive relationships are nice people in terrible situations. As a result, many of you may struggle when you aren't those things. Narcissistic abuse is theft. It steals so much from us. It steals hope. It steals identity. It steals aspirations. It steals joy. It steals safety. It steals happiness. And in some ways, it steals our empathy. These relationships really result in empathy fatigue. We provide it, but we don't get any of it back from them. And empathy is in some ways a bi-directional system. Some does need to come back in, or we empty ourselves out. So if you are trapped in a long-term narcissistically abusive situation, it's not that your empathy goes away, but it just gets harder to put it out there because you're kind of scraping the bottom of the well. You become numb. So we find ourselves at our worst in these relationships. We are already struggling. And the cruelty of narcissistic abuse is that while we are struggling, on top of that, we view ourselves as being rotten people. Many people in narcissistic relationships find that they are thinking mean thoughts, and that's not their norm to think those mean thoughts, ranging from wishing that the narcissist was dead, or that their narcissist business deal falls apart, or hoping that the person that they are betraying you with cheats on them as well, or feeling a sense of happy when something bad happens to the narcissist, or being glad when the narcissist's flight gets canceled coming home. So then you don't have to deal with them for another day. We think these thoughts, right? And they're not nice. We might also notice that we'll recognize that we're happy when the narcissist calls out sick from work or is working late so they won't bother us for dinner. These thoughts, these feelings, they are at odds with the thoughts and feelings of people who traditionally think of themselves as nice people and who actually usually are nice people. Folks in these situations will feel almost this internal sense of betrayal that they're bad people for even thinking such bad thoughts about someone they're in a relationship with. It can all be very disjointed. Many people in relationships with narcissistic people remain really nice people around other nice people. They are nice to the people in the grocery store. They're nice with their good friends. They're nice with nice coworkers or with nice people in their community. But when the narcissistic person is around or evoked, they find themselves dark-hearted. We all find ourselves dark-hearted, cold, and cut off. There's a disjointed quality to this that can feel unsettling for a nice person who values being kind and nice. And then all of a sudden feeling numb and cold when the narcissist is around, it is not a good feeling. So think about it. What is a major strategy I talk about for managing a narcissist? Gray rock, right? A lot of people managing narcissistic folks, they hate gray rocking because they feel like it's mean, that it makes them a sort of a mean person, that by being disengaged, that in a way that they're almost being mean or cold or unkind, as though taking the narcissist bait is the kind thing to do because it soothes the narcissist. So after gray rocking, while the strategy may work in the short term, it means that if you gray rock, you don't give the narcissist the satisfaction that of taking the bait or your emotion or giving them your emotion, or you don't fall for the same old tricks and defend yourself, or you just stick to the superficial topics, right? It's a good strategy, but it doesn't feel nice. And after gray rocking, people don't feel like they're being nice people. And your identity is that as a nice person, that disconnect doesn't feel good. I'm a nice person, but I'm actually really being kind of cold and cut off with this person, even though it's for a good reason. Another issue is the victim bully complex. Narcissists bully and bully and bully. You might hit the wall and not be able to take it anymore. And then you say something like, "Why are you so mean?" Or maybe you go all in and say, "You know what? Everybody around here hates you. You are a bully and all of us hate you." And then boom, as I've talked about in other videos, and they do this better than anyone, they turn into a victim, petulant and sad and woe is me. And you feel bad. You feel bad that you said something so mean to someone. And now they look actually really pitiful, right? Your fawn response or your need to rescue may turn on, and you may really struggle and quickly try to appease them. And if they keep playing the victim, then once again, the person experiencing the narcissistic abuse feels guilty for saying such a mean thing that hurt the narcissistic person. The daily thoughts that populate the brain of someone who is forced into or remains in proximity to a narcissistic person tend to be a little dark. You might think like, what would my life be like without them? I know it would be so much better without them. I wish they didn't exist. You might think something like, oh, imagine if there was an accident and they weren't here. And you feel bad for thinking that. People who are stuck in narcissistic relationships aren't murderous or dangerous, but they may also find themselves envying the lives of other people that aren't riddled with narcissists. They may envy people who are in happy marriages, or envy people who have partners that do not cheat, or envy people who have partners who cherish them, envy people who have nice parents, or people who have collaborative and friendly workplaces. And that envy doesn't feel good. You want to be happy for other people, but narcissism and narcissistic abuse steal so much of our happiness, put so much stress into our world, fills us with regret. It's exhausting trying to avoid the passive aggressive barbs and the victimized blather and the rage and the bait, that you just get exhausted and in some cases disgusted, and can sometimes find it hard to be happy for other people. You rally, but inside you feel sort of worn out, and that doesn't feel good when you are someone who prides yourself on empathy, on kindness, and being there for others in an emotionally rich way. Most of us don't like who we are when we are with the narcissistic person. When we are with narcissistic folks, we feel like we are always angry or depressed or anxious or withdrawn or empty or physically ill or resentful or hopeless. It doesn't feel good. And when we are sitting in these negative mood states, we don't like ourselves. We can see the difference when we aren't with the narcissist. We're better. But the more we are with the narcissistic person, the more the echoes of what they do to us trickles into our lives and leaves us feeling pulled out of the other parts of our lives. This is real. The theft of our joy is real. The theft of our soul is real. When we are with someone toxic, it affects us. It's that simple. You aren't bad, but trying to survive while spending time with them really takes a toll on us and can sometimes leave us thinking things that we don't like to think. Again, we're not bad people. We don't want to harm anybody, but we have these thoughts and then think, gosh, I'm like this with them. I feel like I'm a bad person. And for some people, there's a fear that if I'm like this enough, I'm going to always be this dark-hearted person who envies happy people. And that doesn't feel good. For some folks, therapy becomes a really important tool to push back on that. Just having a safe place to vent these kinds of bad, uncomfortable feelings and then put them out there and hopefully get them validated. Thanks again.